And joining us on the show, it's my good friend, Grant Baldwin. It's been too long, my friend.
It has been a minute. Now, I know that you were talking about this is episode 101. Is that right?
It's 101.
Okay, so I feel like I've been on before. Have you had many other repeat guests?
I think...
I feel like PT probably has the crown on that. But
well, yeah, and PT for a while was my co-host.
Okay, all right. So he's in his own category. But have you had many repeat guests?
I'm thinking maybe Gene Chatsky and you.
Okay, me and Gene.
There it is.
There we go. Money and media. Here we go.
Grant's just saying. I want to ask first, before we get into booking gigs and finding gigs and branding yourself, I think we should probably start there. Let's talk about your journey for people that haven't heard it. Your first public speaking gig, paid gig, if I'm not mistaken, was at a 4-H.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I'd done a little bit of speaking before. I had worked as a youth pastor and had a lot of opportunities to speak in that context. And then actually worked for a school assembly organization where they would get bookings and I would just show up, literally like a script that I would present on their behalf that paid peanuts. But this 4-H one that I talk about in the book was the first like true paid gig that I had done on my own. Like I worked to go out to find the gig, book the gig, go through the whole process. And it was an incredibly, incredibly rewarding experience to go do that gig, to come to, and I talk about in the book, literally after I left the gig, they hand me a check for $1,000. I get in the car in the parking lot. I just broke down in tears. I was like, I cannot believe that they paid me $1,000 to do this thing that I would have done for free if I was just independently wealthy. And it was just so much fun. Really enjoyed it. Wanted to do more of it. And so basically started the process from there of like, how do you actually consistently find and book gigs? And so for the next several years, for the past 13 years or so of my career, I've been in the speaking industry primarily as a full-time professional speaker, doing anywhere from a handful to 70 gigs a year. And so we've just learned a lot about what works and what doesn't work. And there's going to be people who are watching or listening who want to be a full-time speaker, who want to do 50, 60, 70 gigs. And others say, I have zero desire to do that much, but I wouldn't mind doing 5 gigs or 10 gigs here or there. And just trying to figure out what are the steps or process that I need to take or follow in order to be able to find and book those gigs. So yeah, that's what we cover. That's what we teach inside the book and inside of our training material.
I wanted to start there, Grant, because I think that was an important lesson that you made when I was reading the book, which is that these are kids who are leaders in livestock. They're mostly farming kids. Mm-hmm. And you draw this great point that you were neither a farmer nor anybody who knew anything about livestock. And yet it's your first $1,000 check.
Yeah. And I think that's somewhat of a misconception that people assume is that you need to be deep entrenched in the weeds and something like that in order to be able to speak on that. But the reality was like, they weren't hiring me to come in and talk about, here's the latest and greatest strategies for milking cows or growing corn, or I don't even know what the other options are. So that's not what they were looking for. I don't know how to do any of these things. I would butcher a garden, but they knew that I was working with, I would do a good job connecting with students and helping them deal with some of the, the challenges or obstacles that they were dealing with, and could help motivate and inspire teenagers. And so that's a lot of where I got my start as a former youth pastor. Did a lot of speaking with high schools and colleges, and then started doing more with organizations and companies. And so today, the bulk of what we do is with entrepreneurs. And so that's why, FinCon is a great audience, is a great group for us to work with, because there's a lot of people in the FinCon community who again, may not necessarily want to be full-time speakers, but are building a platform, are building a brand, and want to be able to speak and share that message. And speaking is one form of that. And so if they can figure out how to find and book gigs, and we can be a part of that, then it's certainly a win.
Well, and I think a win with that story for a lot of people is that I think a lot of us define ourselves too narrowly. Like we think that, hey, I'm in the financial area, I'm in the whatever. You just widen it to leadership, and you're teaching these kids about leadership who are in a totally different industry. And all of a sudden, I felt like, as I was reading it, I felt like, geez, my marketing that I'm branding, which I often have narrowed, I had this narrow band of stuff I thought I could do. Now all of a sudden I think much, much, much bigger about the things that I can do.
Well, it's a balance for sure, because one of the things we talk about in the book is you want to be the steakhouse and not the buffet. The steakhouse and not the buffet. And what we mean by that is, if Joe, you and I we were looking for a good steak, like we have a choice. We could go to a buffet where steak is one of 100 different things that they offer and they're all mediocre, or you could go to a steakhouse where they do one thing, but they do that one thing really, really well. So you don't go to a steakhouse and expect lasagna or tacos or pizza. You go because they do this one thing. And really that's what you want to be doing as a speaker. And so if you look, like, for example, inside the FinCon community, I've seen some people, I'm drawing blank on names, but people who say, all right, we're going to teach financial blog or financial personal finance specifically for physicians and doctors, or we want to teach it for, single 20 somethings who are paying off college debt. Right. So there's something to be said for being very narrow, very, very clear, very focused, because because oftentimes we assume that, like, okay, the bigger the audience that I can speak to, the wider that I can cast the net, the more topics I can talk about, the more people I could speak about, the more opportunities I would have. But the reality is like, people are looking for like this one specific thing. Okay, I do this one specific thing for this one specific person. So if someone's looking through 10 different personal finance blogs, and I'm a doctor, and there's a bunch that are just generic, but then there's one that says all we do is personal finance specifically for physicians and doctors, like, perfect, you get me, you understand me. So it's going to be a lot more likely that I'm going to focus on that versus just kind of looking for something that's generic but may not necessarily apply to me and where I'm at.
I'm going to skip the parts of the book and by the way, these are hugely important parts of the book about finding your message, about constructing a good talk. I want to fast forward to the piece about just branding yourself and finding gigs. So if people need to know how to construct a message, obviously the Successful Speaker would be a great place to find that information. But let's talk about branding, because you draw a line here, Grant, in your book where a lot of people talk about their company, right? Mm-hmm. And you make a big point of saying, especially when you're a speaker, people aren't hiring your company. You got to brand around something different.
Yeah, and so there's pros and cons both ways. But for most speakers, they are positioning themselves as the product. Whenever an organization, whenever PT hired me, a few years ago to do the closing keynote, like you mentioned, or to do a workshop here and there with you guys, he's not hiring, like, our legal company name that we file taxes for is the Baldwin Group. But PT isn't hiring the Baldwin Group. He's hiring Grant to come in and speak. And so you want to recognize and make sure that you understand that speaking is part of a personal brand. Now, the caveat to that is there may be people who say you want to position the company as the product versus the person as the product, right? It's not that one's better or worse than the other, but you want to make sure that you're really, really clear. Do you want to, so for example, for us, whenever people come to us and they say, I want to hire you to speak, then I'm going to send them to grantbaldwin.com. That's our hub for personal brand, for speaking. That's where people are going to go. Versus when people say, hey, I'm interested in learning more about being a speaker, what we do in that case, we go to thespeakerlab.com. And so it's two totally different companies depending on what someone is looking for there. So you really want to just figure out, are you positioning yourself, the person, as the product and the brand, which would be the case for most speakers, or are you positioning the company and you are speaking on behalf of the company? So again, there's pros and cons both ways, but again, for most speakers, you want to be positioned in the personal brand way.
But I think it's important because a lot of people then think, as they establish their brand, Grant, that they're going to have to spend some money then to set up their brand. And we'll talk about that here in a second. But if you don't have a lot of money to spend at first and you're trying to brand yourself, where do we begin?
Yeah, totally understand that. Totally get that. Whenever you are starting, we feel like, all right, I need stuff to look sharp. I need stuff to look professional, but I'm on a limited budget. I had the exact same challenge when I got started. I still have the exact same challenge, right? Everyone has a limited, finite number of resources there. And so my very first website, my very first video, I spent a couple $100s on the website. And I think and this was, again, creating a website, 10, 12, 13 years ago or so. Today, there are very, very simple, clean options like a Squarespace or like a Wix or, some WordPress templates. We provide a template for our students that makes it really, really simple, like drag and drop, color by numbers, that type of thing, that makes it simple to get a good professional site up and running. And the same thing is true on a demo video. I don't know anything really about video editing, but the tools today that are available with simple, drag and drop and cut and paste and that sort of thing. If you know like really basic stuff, you can create a well-done video that doesn't have to have a ton of flash and bells and whistles and that sort of thing. But one of the things that's important to remember is whenever you're creating your website, you're creating your video, you're creating your branding and your marketing materials, remember you're creating version 1 1.0. I think this is the part where people kind of get stuck, is where we compare ourselves to other people. So at this point in my career, I've had 5 or 6 different websites. In fact, our company, the Speaker Lab, we just released a new website a couple of days ago, and it looks, I'm biased, but I think it looks really, really good. We spent a lot of money on it, but I also recognize, like, that's not what we had in the beginning. Like, that was we had version 1.0, and you work with what you've got, you improve as you go, you do the best that you can. And so don't, if you're getting started and you're creating your version 1.0 video or website or whatever it may be, don't compare your stuff to someone who may be, years ahead of you. Is like, they're on version 7 of their website or their video, so it should be significantly better than yours. But also keep in mind that event planners and organizers who are considering hiring you versus others, your stuff needs to look on par with other people that are at your level. So if you're, let's say, an up and coming speaker, let's say you charge $2,000 for a talk, and you're looking at a demo video or a website of a speaker who's a $30,000 keynote, well, an event planner is not looking at both of those side by side. You are, as the speaker, right? But you don't need to be worried about, well, theirs looks better. Well, theirs should look better. That's a $30,000 speaker versus where you are. So don't compare yourself to where other people are, especially when you're getting started.
Yeah, my mom down here in the basement always says, "Don't let perfect be the enemy of good." Right.
Right.
I mean, start off on the right foot. But you make a couple points there that I've heard. Number one is, I need a website. Mm-hmm. And that website for you would be initially, depending on what your branding is, probably like grantbaldwin.com, right? Would be Correct. Your name is you as a speaker.
Yeah, correct. And so I highly recommend that you have your name as the domain. In fact, I had to purchase grantbaldwin.com from another guy named Grant Baldwin. Yeah, he was a retired guitar teacher in California. And thankfully, he sold it to me for $300, which is some of the best money that I've spent. I actually purchased the domain names for my wife and all 3 of my daughters. And now I'm just squatting on those until they need them someday. And then I'm going to sell it back to them at an exorbitant rate. So I'm excited about that. But you got to consider, like, in this day and age, like, your name, especially as a .com, is a hub. Even if you're just like, I don't know what I'll do with it, I don't know that I'm gonna speak, I don't know that I'm gonna be an author, I'd still highly recommend. Same with, like, my daughters. Like, they have no clue what they're going to use a domain for. They may never use it, but I would rather have it for them should they need it someday. So get it. And again, we have the .com, the .org, the .net, the .me, the fill in the blank version. Try to grab those and hang on to those. And
it's just a very simple, it sounds like what you're describing is just a very simple 1-page site to start off with.
Yeah, like, you don't need to get fancy, and especially early on, like, you can start with like a very simple site that talks about your demo video is really important to have up there. Have a couple, like a quick bio. I like to include a lot of different pictures that show some social proof that this is what this is something that you've done on multiple occasions. Having some testimonials there, having a little bit about what you speak on, and having some type of contact form where people can reach out if they want to start the conversation with you. So it doesn't have to be, again, what a store or a blog, or like, don't do all those things, right? You can do all those things at some point, but let's start with version 1.0 and go simplified first before we get into the more complex.
Let's talk about that demo video that you mentioned. How does that work? What should be in my demo video?
Yeah, a demo video is one of those things that can hang up a lot of people and kind of get confusing, but it really doesn't need to be. So think of a demo video like a movie trailer, right? Joe, before you and I would go see a movie on some type of a romantic date, we would want to see a movie trailer first, right? So they take a 90-minute movie, they boil it down to 2 or 3 minutes, and within those 2 or 3 minutes, you have an idea of the plot, the theme, who's in it. And the point of a movie trailer and the point of a demo video is to make people want to see more. When someone's considering hiring you to speak, and especially if they're considering paying you to speak, they don't necessarily need to see like an entire talk, right? In the same way that I don't need to see an entire movie to know whether or not I'm going to like it. I need to see not even like 2 or 3 minutes. I can probably see about 30 seconds of a movie trailer and be like, nah, I don't know that that's for me. Or like, yeah, that looks really cool. I want to go see that, right? And that's the point of a demo video. And that's the point of the movie trailer. So the other thing you have to remember is people that are going, or like event planners who are in the position to hire speakers, they are in the risk mitigation business. So for example, a couple of years ago, when PT hired me to do that closing keynote and I spill water and make a mess, whenever he puts me up on the FinCon stage, I am a representation of him and the FinCon brand. So anything I do and say can be held against me in a court of law or something like that. But anything that I do or say reflects on him, either positively or negatively. So as soon as I get off stage, if people come up to him and are like, why did you hire this guy? This guy was a crappy speaker, or he was inappropriate, or he just wasn't good, or he wasn't well prepared, or anything like that. It makes PT look bad. Versus if I come off stage and people are like, that was amazing. That was one of the best speakers that we've had. Oh, you got to have Grant back, yada, yada, yada. Then it makes him look good, right? So he's taking a big risk by putting me up there and spending any amount of money on any speaker anytime. So he doesn't, again, need to see necessarily a full video, but he needs to see something. Okay, if I don't know Grant from Adam and I'm going to put him up on stage, I need to feel confident that he's going to do a good job. So they need to see a couple of minutes there of footage. So that's the point of the demo video.
Boy, and you make a completely unrelated talk. Well, not completely unrelated, but partially is I never thought about that association and how important that association is. Cause I think about just the few talks that I've done, Grant, and you're exactly right. Or when I go to a place and I see a bad speaker, I immediately associate that speaker with the event immediately. Yeah. And yet you think about how tenuous that relationship really is. Like half your goal when you prep for a talk, I would think, is just to make sure that the person that hired you is at the very least not embarrassed that you were there. Like not even trying to make them happy.
Right.
Just trying at the very least to make sure that they know it wasn't a mistake.
Right. And because we all get this with other things, so, Joe, where do you live? You're in Texas, aren't you?
Detroit now. I was in Texas.
Detroit. Okay. Yeah. Yep. So if I come visit you and I'm up in Detroit, I was like, dude, I'm looking for a good burger. What do you recommend? And you you got to go to wherever, Joe's Burger Shack. And I go to Joe's Burger Shack and it sucks. Then like it reflects poorly on Joe. Like it, and anything, if Joe's like, okay, well, once you like Joe's Burger Shack, you're going to love going over to, Bob's Taco Barn. I'm like, there's zero chance I'm going to Bob's Taco Barn because the first thing you recommended to me wasn't good, right? And so again, like we understand this in all other facets of life, and it's no different for an event planner who's putting a speaker up on stage.
Then next thing is so I have my website, I have my demo video, I've worked on my branding, I make sure that they look attractive, and you get into that a little bit. I don't think we need to go into that too much, but let's talk about then finding your speaking opportunities.
Yeah. So the mistake that some speakers make at this point is like you just said, okay, I've got my website, I got my video, things look good. I don't know. I just sit back and wait for the phone to ring.
If I build it, they will come.
They do not come. They do not care. Like your mom is thrilled about your website. She's going to tell both of her friends. Nobody else cares, right? So at this point, you do have to do something to start the ball in motion, right? Speaking like any other business is very much a momentum business. So just because you create a blog, just because you create a YouTube channel, just because you create a Facebook Live, doesn't mean anybody cares. So you have to do something to start the momentum. So one of the simplest things that you can do that we talk about in the book is you want to make sure that everyone in your sphere of influence knows that you're a speaker. If people don't know that you're a speaker, they won't think of you when the opportunities come up. Now, you may be thinking like, but wait a second, I don't know anybody in my sphere of influence. I don't know, family, friends, mom, dad, coworkers, cousins, anybody. I don't know anyone who's hiring speakers. And that's true. There may not be anyone that you can immediately think of that hires speakers, but they may know of someone who does hire a speaker, right? Or they may be involved in that at some point. So PT and I actually met and first started talking long before he started planning FinCon. And in fact, he and I have joked about this before. I've gone back in the email archives. I had done a lot of speaking. We talked a little bit about it. And I had an email from him at one point years ago saying, hey, I'm thinking about doing this financial conference. Can we just talk about it? Just your experience as a speaker at conferences, right? I didn't actually attend a FinCon for a couple of years, but here's a guy who's a friend who's thinking about putting together a conference. And we were able to chat about it a little bit, right? So again, the point being like, I'm not thinking like, well, why would I tell PT that I'm a speaker? He doesn't at the moment, but he may at some point, in which he has multiple times, right? So you want to make sure everyone in your sphere of influence knows that you're a speaker, because let's take something like FinCon, and let's look in the perspective of PT. FinCon is a big event. There's a lot of speakers, but he's not going to spend every day of an entire year picking out speakers for the conference. He's probably going to spend a couple of days out of the entire year. He may be kind of noodling on it and thinking about it, mulling it around, but really it's going to be a couple of days out of the entire year. And speakers are one of hundreds, if not thousands of moving pieces that he and Jessica and the team are working on to put together the event. So it's not like they're spending all day, every day thinking about speakers. So what you're trying to do as a speaker is you're trying to be top of mind, that whenever he does decide, all right, by Friday, I need to decide on our speakers. You want to be top of mind when he gets to that point, right? So you want to make sure that you are on the radar as a speaker, otherwise that they won't think of you. So that's one of the simplest things you could do.
It's funny, Grant. An analogy. I've read a lot about Disney, and when Eisner and team took over after Walt Disney's core team kind of frankly was running Disney into the ground. And the one thing Walt always said was that he wanted his parks to stand on their own, and they would not advertise the parks. People would want to go to the park, and over time, because he didn't advertise, and advertising in the 70s and 80s became more and more a part of American life, that it got crowded out. And when Eisner took over, they started advertising again. And his whole point was that I don't get me wrong, I want people to go to the park. My problem is you don't have any mind share because nobody even knows we exist anymore.
Yeah.
We're so far away, nobody knows we exist. So to your point, I mean, on a little bit smaller level, but the same point, Eisner's first mission wasn't to get people to go to Disney. It was to make them aware that I'm in this field, and at the very least, when you've got 5 people to choose from, I get to be one of the 5. Like you're saying, play on that field first.
Yeah, absolutely. So you think about, those major companies like a Disney, like an Apple, like a Google, like a Coca-Cola, like a McDonald's. Like you see their branding and advertising and signage everywhere. Like, why does Coca-Cola we get it. You create a soft drink, right? But they're trying to stay, again, top of mind, so that whenever you're like, I'm thirsty, what sounds good? A Coca-Cola sounds good, right? And that's ultimately what you're trying to do. So if people, like when other people are coming to when someone's coming to PT and they're like, hey, we're putting on a conference, who do you recommend? And if the people that come to mind is like, oh, wait, Grant's not a speaker. It's like, but if he didn't know that I was a speaker, like then again, I've missed an opportunity there. Yeah. So you want to make sure, I'll give you a quick example of this. So a couple of years ago, I was interested in doing some more coaching with speakers, and I was like, I see other people and like they all have a bunch of coaching clients. Why don't I have any coaching clients? And then all of a sudden we put something on our website and sent something like created a coaching page on our site and sent something out to our email list. And all of a sudden I had all these inquiries for coaching clients. Right. And it's just kind of like, people don't know that you do the thing unless you tell them that you do the thing. Like I didn't even know that you did that. I had no idea. Like I just didn't even connect the dots. You have to connect the dots for them and let people know that you're a speaker.
That's funny. So many times people, I think, just seethe in private, why didn't they think of me?
Yeah.
You didn't let people know.
You didn't know.
You bring up some other stuff. Well, and even just by the way, 2 quick questions. You and I go to a movie together. Who gets told the popcorn? Just want to know that ahead of time.
I mean, I think of the buckets. It's a big bucket. It sits between us.
There you go.
So I'm good with that. Yeah.
That's fair. But then the less serious question is that it seems to me that where you're leading by this is if you start off with your sphere of influence, making sure they all know. Second thing in my mind, then the next domino is expanding your sphere of influence, which means, I guess, then that social media becomes a fairly important part of your game.
Social media is a factor. So it's not like, I don't know that there's any one thing like, hey, if you just do this, if you just nail your Twitter bio, you're good as a speaker, right? It's kind of like death by 1,000 cuts. There's a number of different things that you can do. So I'll rattle off a couple here. One is that you want to make sure that your website is really well optimized for those keywords that you are positioning yourself as a speaker. So if someone is searching for a speaker like you, what are they going to search for, right? Because it's every single day there are event planners who are going, I know I need a speaker. I have no idea where to go. I'm going to go to Google and I'm going to search for financial speaker or insurance speaker or whatever, right? And you want to make sure that your website is showing up whenever people search that. You also want to make sure that you are building relationships and connections with other speakers. I remember my very first full-time year speaking, I did about 25, 30 gigs. And I remember like looking back through at the end of the year thinking, okay, where did these gigs come from? How do I reverse engineer this? How do I keep this momentum going? And I remember seeing that the largest source of gigs that I had at that point came from other speakers, came from referrals, right? So PT has come to me before and said, hey, we've had you up on our stage. You understand our audience. You've been to the conference numerous times. Who else do you recommend? Who else would do a good job, right? And I know of a couple of speakers that I've recommended that he's ended up hiring because I know like if Grant would do a good job and Grant says that they're good, then I trust Grant's opinion, and so I'm going to have that person come speak, and so that can be very effective as well. Any other events that you have worked with? I've done this with PT before, of saying, okay, there are other events that you're aware of. Again, you've seen me speak. Who else do you know of that you think I would be a good fit for? Could you make some type of recommendation? Again, goes back to what we talked about earlier. If PT goes to someone else who has, XYZ conference, and they said, Grant actually spoke at our conference numerous times, he would be great, you need to have him, and PT makes that intro, that's going to go huge way. The other thing I would say, and this can be daunting for people, but this can be really effective and it works, is you can identify and find events that you would be a good fit for, and you can ask to speak. You can ask to speak. The reason that I have been able to speak at FinCon year after year after year is because I ask. And the very first time I ask, and then I show up and I do a great job. I'm good to work with. I promote the event, and I'm a good all around representation for FinCon, right? And so I recognize that, and I know that because of that, it makes it easier for PT to want to work with me again and again. Makes it easier for him to want to recommend me to other events, and so you build a lot by just building those relationships with event planners.
That's fantastic. And back to your story about PT, I like how you asked him for referrals, but then again, you didn't say to yourself, well, how come PT didn't recognize that I was great for this other event? You asked PT, what other events do you think I would be great at? And then he tried to answer you, but he can't read your mind.
Well, exactly. And like to that point, like if you take a step back and you look at something like FinCon's a big conference. They have 100 plus speakers. It seems like, you have a bunch of keynotes, but you also have a whole bunch of workshops and breakouts and everything in between. There is no shortage of opportunity there. So if I reach out to PT and say, hey, here's a topic that I could speak on that I think would be a fit for your event, then I'm not trying to convince him of a need he already has. He is already planning on hosting an event. He's already planning on having a speaker. I'm showing him why I am a good fit for that event. So for example, like the closing keynote that I got a couple years ago in Charlotte, it wasn't because I just sat back and waited. I went the year before in New Orleans. I spoke and I did a free workshop, and that went really well. And he had good feedback from that. And then I just kept asking him, like not in an annoying, stalking way, but just saying top of mind of like, hey, here's an angle of a talk I think would be really good. And I think here's how I think that this would work for FinCon. And ultimately he was like, yeah, cool. That makes sense, because I asked and because I followed up. Again, it's not not being a pain, not being annoying, but staying top of mind with him, knowing that like he's going to hire a speaker, either whether it's me or someone else. I don't have to convince him to hire a speaker. I'm just showing why I would be a good fit for that event.
That's fantastic. I've got just a couple more things. One that I found a little surprising, partly because it felt later on, Grant, to be obvious, and yet to everybody listening to this, it's not obvious. But you say Google's your friend. like a Google search can solve a lot of problems, and yet it's right in front of me, and I never think of that.
Yeah, you're exactly right. Of just searching for events and conferences that you would be a good fit for. Now, this goes back to some of the things that we touched on earlier, where if people feel like, okay, who do I speak to? Oh, I speak to people. I speak to humans. Well, and what do I speak about? Well, I speak about leadership and financial planning and change and culture and sales and marriage and family and parents. It's like you may know something about all those things, but if you try to speak on all those things, if you try to create a blog on all these things, it ends up being for nobody at all. But if you're really clear on this is who I speak to, this is the problem that I solve for them, then the third question you can think about is, where do those people gather? If I am deeply passionate about speaking to people about insurance, where do those people gather, right? Maybe there's not an event where people come to learn about insurance, but there's a lot of events and conferences around the topic of insurance for insurance agencies and brokerages and that sort of thing. And so are there opportunities for you to speak to them on a local, state, regional, national level? And so there's a lot of opportunities around these different conferences and events. You just have to do a little bit of digging in the dirt to find them.
I want to ask as my last question here, then I want to talk about the making of the book, because we've got people in the audience that are interested in that, especially your partnership. I want to hear about you and Jeff working together. But before we get to that, speaking organizations, I hear about like the National Speakers Association. I don't even know the names, but are there associations that we should belong to, some that we should avoid? What do you think about things like Toastmasters, that type of thing?
Yeah, so a lot of it just depends on what you're going for. So something like Toastmasters, there are thousands and thousands of different Toastmasters chapters all over the world, and so Toastmasters is good for if you want to get better as a speaker, right? It gives you an opportunity. One of the best ways to get better as a speaker is you speak. The best way that you get better as a writer is that you write. And so sometimes it's difficult to, as a speaker, have the opportunity to get those reps. And if you want to get better at shooting free throws, there's a lot of basketball goals all over the place that you could just go and shoot free throws. But if you want to get better as a speaker, it can be a little bit difficult because you need some other people, you need some participation there, some type of setting where it makes sense for you to actually speak. So Toastmasters gives you some at bats. Now, what I don't like about Toastmasters, as a caveat here, is Toastmasters can tend to be very, very formulaic and robotic, and so they want you speak like this and da, 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 da. And one of the things I try to remind myself of and remind other speakers of is that you are a human talking to a collection of other humans. So it's good to be prepared, it's good to be polished, it's good to be rehearse and practice and all those sort of things. So when you get on stage, you are ready to go. But if you are just regurgitating a script, or you're so deep in your own head thinking about what is my next line, and I'm supposed to go over here, and I'm supposed to do this, and I'm supposed to do that, then it's just like, ugh, like it just feels very robotic and formulaic. The National Speakers Association, the NSA, the good NSA, is good for connecting with other speakers. So people are like, oh, I'm going to join the NSA and I'm going to get gigs. You don't join the NSA to get gigs, but you would go there just to, again, like we talked about earlier, to learn about the business, to learn about the industry, to network with other speakers, to share some best practices and strategies and tips, that sort of thing. There are, I think, 40 or 50 chapters around the country. If there's a local chapter near you, I'd highly recommend that you check it out, because it can be very worthwhile. And then they do a couple of big national conferences on an annual basis. So yeah, the big thing I would say with like a Toastmasters or an NSA is that if you have a chapter near you, you need to go to one and try it, right? Because your results may vary, your mileage may vary. So go see if you feel like it would be a fit for you.
Your speaking talent obviously is phenomenal. You paired with a gentleman who is known for his writing talent. I feel like this book is kind of like the Super Friends, you and Jeff Goins. For people that don't know, Jeff, not only does he write just some fantastic stuff, but he also teaches people to write like you teach people to speak. Mm-hmm. Tell me about how this partnership began and this project began, because I think that sometimes we get lost, Grant, in our own silo, and a lot of the power in doing better work is maybe partnering with somebody.
Yeah, this is, and I love talking about this. So if we go way back, Jeff and I have been friends for 5-6 years, something like that. Jeff, like you mentioned, is a phenomenal writer. He has written and published many books. He knows the publishing world really, really well. And I think sometimes as entrepreneurs, we feel like if we're going to go into something new, that we have to figure all the ins and outs of that thing out, right? Versus like, how about I pair up with someone who could help me with this? So in this case, for example, Jeff came to me a couple years ago, and basically it started with a text where he said, have you ever thought about writing a book? And I was like, I don't know. Like, I'd actually self-published when I was doing a lot of speaking with students. I'd self-published a book. I'd written every single word of it. It's a long process. So I was just like, I don't necessarily enjoy writing. And so I'm not just like, man, I'm fired up to write something today. Like that's just not me. Again, not a knock.
Even with Jeff Goins, that's exactly what I would have said, by the way, Grant.
Yeah. Like I recognize the value of a book, and it just was not on my radar. And so we kind of hemmed and hawed, and he and I kind of kicked some stuff around. And ultimately he said, okay, here's the deal. I'm kind of between projects. I'm kind of intrigued in doing some type of ghostwriting project. So what if we do this? Grant, you already have all of this content. You have all this knowledge. You have all this experience. You have the audience. What if we work together? I'll take all of that stuff and I'll synthesize it and put it into a book format, right? And help create something. And we kind of figured out what that arrangement would look like. And so basically that's what happened. Was he took all of our content and we kind of worked together to figure out, we did a lot of interviews. I connected him with a lot of people in our audience for case studies and examples. And he'd say, okay, we're working on the chapter about speaking fees. And I said, cool, here's a couple of resources or a blog post or some podcast interviews we've done specifically on speaking fees. So he's able to, again, take our content and put it into book format. So now that we are, at this point with the book live, I am incredibly proud of it. In fact, the book, at the time of this recording, the book came out yesterday. I had a couple people message me. They're like, I got the book in the mail yesterday. I've already read the whole thing cover to cover. Yeah. It's amazing. And my initial reaction, I told my wife this morning, I was like, I think if I had written it, they wouldn't be talking like that, right? Because I just recognize my skill set, and there's things I'm good at, and there's things I'm not. I'm not good at. Like, I agree. Like, I got all the content out there, but to take it and put it into like a well-polished, well-refined book, like I don't know how to do this, but Jeff knows that world really, really well. And so Jeff ended up being basically like a non-ghostwriter, right? I was the author, he was the scribe, and he put it all together and did a phenomenal job. And so yeah, I think it speaks to like me recognizing my skill sets, Jeff recognizing his skill sets, working together on it. We even talked initially, we're like, okay, doing something like this with a friend has the potential to really end poorly. And thankfully, like I've told him publicly and privately, like I would 100% do this project again with him. We had a great experience. We really outlined from the beginning who's responsible for what, how that was going to play out. And so really, really, really happy with the finished product.
And it also, the partnership continues. I mean, now that the book has come out yesterday, as we record this, to your point, now, even though you had to create all those things and Jeff puts it together brilliantly with A, your tactic, B, lots of stories and examples, and then C, these action tips I like at the end of every chapter. But now you really take over, you know, in much more of the driver's seat because of your skill set. So, yeah. I mean, a book is two parts. It's making the book and then people buying the book. And that creates somebody who does what you do.
Yeah, it was and we both talked about this and knew this going into it, that he was going to do the majority of the work up front. And you know, we would meet and he'd pick my brain on stuff and he'd record interviews and conversations. And then he would go into the lair and hit his back cave and create the book. But he knew at some point, like, okay, there's a finished book now. I'm going to hand it to you and it's your job to promote it and talk about it. So that's absolutely been the case. But Jeff's also been incredibly helpful because I'm kind of like, okay, we have a finished book. So now what do we do with it, right? Same like we were talking about with speaking, right? Just because you have a website, just because you have a video, just because you have a book, doesn't mean anybody cares. Like there's plenty of books. The world doesn't need more books, but we have one. What do we do with it? How do we maximize it? So getting his feedback of saying, okay, you need to do this and do this and do this and do this. And then me saying, okay, now it's my part. The baton has been handed. And so he's been much more in a consulting role at this point of telling me what to do and kind of the puppet master behind the scenes, pulling the strings, I guess.
It's so fantastic. All started with a friendship.
Yep.
The book is called The Successful Speaker, 5 Steps for Booking Gigs, Getting Paid, and Building Your Platform. And I believe, Mr. Baldwin, it's available just about everywhere.
Everywhere, I think. Yeah, that's what Jeff told me. So yeah, the book is on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, wherever books are sold. Yeah, definitely go check out the book.
Well, thanks for spending some time with us talking about it today, and congratulations on another job well done, my friend.
Thanks, Joe. Appreciate it, man.